Welcome to another one of my tutorial videos. Today I'm going to be teaching you some of the basics on writing. This isn't going to be anything advanced like symbolism or metaphors or setups and payoffs or anything like that. This is just going to be something to kind of get you started and kind of psych you up. This one will probably be a free tutorial. There will be tutorials that you can pay for on QBrush that'll be more advanced. But because this is kind of like a simple little thing I'm doing, I didn't feel like it made a lot of sense to make you guys pay for it. So, yeah, go check that out if you want. If you like this video, go check that out, and also go check out my YouTube channel because I have examples of what I'm doing in this video and an advanced writing video in some of those. Those are over video games because I know. Video games probably the most alongside comics, but comics are kind of hard to do videos for because I like to read comic books like in person, like in my hands. I don't like reading digital comics, so for me it feels weird to read them like online to you guys. So even if you don't play videos, I recommend seeing the if you don't play video games, I'm sorry, I do recommend seeing the videos anyway, just because I'll be able to show you like visually how to do some of this stuff. So step number 1, write some garbage. And I think this is actually the hardest step of all the steps. I think it's even harder than figuring out like symbolism or metaphor or some of that really cringeworthy stuff, or even grammar. Because I think everybody who reads a book, everybody who starts writing, who wants to be a writer, thinks that writing goes something like this. Like, you're writing, and then suddenly, bam, you're writing Harry Potter, and then you sell like 1 million copies. And people just think this is how it, works. Like I just throw my hands on the keyboard, and then suddenly I have a bestseller. And that doesn't happen ever. In fact, when you start writing, your writing will probably look something like this. Obviously not with all the jumbled up letters, but the first thing that you write and the first rough draft of Harry Potter is probably complete and utter garbage. And that's important to understand because a lot of people think that if they write a sentence and it's not like just the best thing you've ever read, like it's not like gold from the get-go, that means that they suck, that they need to stop everything they're doing, that they are never meant to write, they'll never write a good book because that first sentence was not amazing. And that just isn't realistic, and it's not a good thought. It's not healthy. It's not a healthy thought process to have, and I don't recommend it. Understand and accept from the get-go that whatever you write, whatever that first draft is going to be doo-doo. It's going to be poopy, okay? It's not going to be good. And once you accept that, then that's when you start to really improve and when you start to really make some progress, okay? All of my writing, Vacant, Granny Joe, whatever novel I am writing, I write at least 50 pages of trash that I know is trash, just so that I kind of start learning about my world. I start coming up with different ideas. I start brainstorming, but I just write the first thing I think of, I write in that first rough draft, and then I go back and I edit it. And most writers do this. Most writers don't sit there with their, well, maybe they drink tea, but I think everybody has this mental picture of how a writer is. They're drinking tea, they got classical music on, they're smoking a cigarette, and then they think of something brilliant. And most writers are like what I'm doing right now. They're in their pajamas, maybe drinking some coffee, maybe tea if you like tea, but they haven't done their makeup or hair, and they're just sitting here in agony trying to think of the rough draft, and that's normal, okay? If you're not literally listening to classic music, you're not like suddenly a bad writer. And that is the most common problem I find with new writers. I have a lot of people come up to me asking, like, what are some tips you have for new writers? And the most common thing I see is that people don't understand that you're going to have like 5 or 6 or 7 rough drafts before you get to your final draft. That everything is a rough draft until it's published. Okay? Like, and that's just the reality of it. Alright? So after that, after you write like your 50 pages of garbage, which I've done, I like have written like 80 pages of a novel and realized I didn't like it. And also, which reminds me, it's also okay if you write 80 pages of something and you realize you don't like the story. I want to bring that up before I move on to the next step, because there's a lot of people who feel really bad when they ditch an idea. Like they'll write like the first novel of their story and realize they don't even really like it, and then they feel like a failure because they didn't complete the trilogy or something. And I'm here to tell you that you're not really. That's actually quite common, and a lot of people deal with it. Like, what I do is, if I come up with a new idea, I wait 6 months. And if I'm still thinking about the idea 6 months from now or a year from then I complete it. That's what I did with Bacon and Granny Joe. Until then, if I think of a new idea, like, I'll try to think of new things for it, but I won't commit to it until, like, a year later. Or 6 months later, or a month later. Or if you really like an idea and you want to just start writing it, go ahead and start writing it. But then don't feel bad if you lose interest. Because I know a lot of people who don't even write because they think to themselves, what's the point? I'm not going to finish it. And that's a toxic way of thinking, because if you never start something or you never practice, so you're never going to get to the point of completing it. You have to start before you finish, right? So I felt like I needed to bring that up before I move on to the next thing. So after you have written your 80 pages of slock, what you're going to do is you're going to do your research. And you can do this before you write too. And how you do your research is exactly how it's described. You go on Google, you take classes, you do whatever you need to do to learn about what you are writing. If you're writing about medieval, then, research things that tie into that. Read books, watch videos. What I do is I like to watch a lot of videos on YouTube from different perspectives and people with different lives than me. Here is Ron Tasmo, who is a gay man who talks about gay characters. I love watching his videos because it's just from, like, I learn more about a world that I'm not a part of, that I've never really been a part of. At least I'm not a cisgender gay dude, and so I have never experienced that. So I have watched all of them. They're great if you want to learn something new. Even if you are not for gay people, you're really against the LGBTA community for whatever reason, I still think it's good to watch just to broaden your horizon. I think it's good to watch videos you don't agree with. An example of this is like feminist videos. Like, I used to not be a feminist back in the day, a few years ago, but I watched feminist videos anyway because I thought it would be important to just know their point of view. So I watched a whole bunch of stuff, and I actually became a feminist because I watched a bunch of other videos because they're so enlightening. But I think a lot of people go, they just see something like, if you're a writer or whatever, you'll see the word feminist and you think, oh, they're bad. I don't want to even learn about them because they're bad. And that's not good for writing because you really need to know people's different point of views. So it's good to watch it and educate yourself anyway, even if you think it goes against your values. I think that's just a great idea. Here's some other people. Let me see if I can show you some others. Errant Signal is great. He talks mostly about video games, but sometimes he talks about other stuff. And he's great for just learning different story techniques. And he likes to analyze video games from like a metaphoric standpoint, and they're really fascinating, so I recommend him. Cinema Sins, which is more like comedy, but they like to point out things that I'd never even thought of. Let's see, what else do we have? Folding Ideas is great. He doesn't post as much as he used to, but he talks about things like editing, different movie things like toxic masculinity. That was a really good episode. Jim Sterling talks mostly about video games too, but he used to do a lot more like story-oriented things, but then recently it's just mostly been about the industry. But he did one on sex in video games that was one of the best videos I've ever seen about that subject, because he articulates his words very well on why sex doesn't really work in that industry and how that's a shame, because video games are like a perfect vehicle to explore that, but because of the way that they're written, sometimes they're not done convincingly, or they're kind of cringeworthy when they're in games. So that is a fantastic video. If you want to look that up, I highly recommend it. Some other tips for writing. Here is Pixar. This is the only tutorial that I actually have followed. I don't like following tutorials because I feel like a lot of people look at writing and they think that there is a certain way of writing that works and that everything else doesn't work, and that there's a best form of writing and everything else is just crap. And that's not true. So my problem with tutorials is that everybody follows them, and then after they follow them, then everybody's writing starts to sound the same. They sound very fluffy. They sound very textbook. Like I was in a writing class in college, a really great writing class. I learned a lot from it, but everybody's writing sounded about the same because they all think I need to write, like, I don't know, this very... I'm trying to think of an example, like a very academic way. Like how many books have I read where it starts off with, I looked out my window on a dark and stormy night, or that morning that I woke up, I had smelt the smell of pecans in the air. There's always like some kind of smell of like some sort of nut or tea or coffee. That's always how it starts off. Or I remember just my mother's scent as I drove down those, I don't know, something like that. And there's a lot of stories that start off like that or are about that, because there's a lot of like books that you read in the school that are written like that, and so everybody thinks, oh well, that did very well, so I should do that too. So I'll read tutorials, but I won't follow them religiously. Instead, I try to find my own voice and try to be honest with myself versus just writing what everybody else writes. But Pixar actually has fantastic tips that I follow all the time. And one of them is write the entire story and redo the entire story, which I have done several times. And that's great advice. Another one is if you're stuck in a story, then you think, okay, from this point on, what is the last thing that this character would do? What is the last thing that what would happen? And then you write that, and that turns out to be your solution. So that's like another like fantastic one. Aside of those tips, let's see, there is Fuck Yeah Character Development, which has a bunch of quizzes. I like taking character quizzes because then I can learn a lot more about my characters in the world, and it really helps with coming up with ideas. They have tutorials and ways of doing things. Again, I personally don't follow them, but if you're a big tutorial person, Fuck Yeah Character Development, tumblr.com is great for that. So once you have done some research, you've learned a little bit more about your world, and you've done quizzes and all that, then you do the most painful part of this whole list, is getting someone else to read it. And this, I want to say that this is something that's easy, that you're going to be able to do without crying, but you probably will. You kind of have to accept that. I remember that when I first gave my writing to someone, I cried because they didn't like it. And it's really hard to have criticism over your work. It's hard to stomach it. But you have to get used to it, because if you do want to be an author, then when it's out there, people are going to read it and they're going to tell you what they think. And if you don't want to have a miserable time, you have to start now on learning how to get a thick skin. And also, criticism will save your life. I would not be where I am right now if my sister did not read everything that I wrote and told me the blunt, honest truth about what she thought. My writing would be way worse, and I wouldn't have as much of a thick skin either, because, I mean, if someone, like, sent me an email saying they didn't like my writing, then I would just be a puddle of tears. And in the art world, in the writing world, you're going to get a lot of rejection letters. You're going to get a lot of people telling you that you can't do it, or that you suck, or whatever. And you have to learn how to deal with it. So a great first step is to get people to read your writing. Please do this. Seriously. And then the last one is to redo your garbage after you write your first draft, whether that first draft is bullet points or I don't know, or like script writing, or however you write your first draft, redo it and look at it from a different perspective. I had a friend who wrote her entire story and realized it worked better in first person, and she didn't want to redo it, but it's good to redo it. I like redoing stories. I think it's fun. I kind of go overboard with it a little bit. I'm trying to get better with it because I do like 100 rough drafts per story. I like doing that. You don't have to do that. I'm just weird. But it's good to redo your story. And if you don't want to commit, you don't want to like write like a 500 pages to redo all the 500 pages, then do bullet points or do script writing, something like that. So I'm going to show you guys an example of how to kind of write, how to think like this, so you guys can, stay tuned for that.